My uncle is obsessively in love with me. He would force me to say that I love him over and over again. He would cut open his own blood vessels to make me feel sorry for him and not leave him. However, after I was killed by my scumbag boyfriend, he rushed to the wedding and massacred the scumbag's wedding. Only in this new life that I've been reborn into did I understand. My uncle just loved me too much. And he used the wrong methods because of his excessive love. What wrong did he do? Looking at the familiar ceiling, I suddenly opened my eyes. But my hand accidentally touched something warm. Awake? My uncle opened those slender and shaped eyes. And he was holding me naked in his arms, staring at me with a smile. The suffocating feeling of struggling on the verge of death was still echoing in my mind. And the fear of my body slowly falling and being powerless all over was still enveloping my heart. Didn't I die? Yee. He lifted my chin, forcing me to look directly at him. You haven't said you love me today yet. He smiled. Those enchanting eyes curved slightly. And the look in his eyes as he looked at me seemed to pierce through me. I pinched myself hard. And the pain immediately came. I actually was reborn? Seeing this familiar face in front of me, my nose suddenly turned sour. And tears fell unexpectedly. A trace of displeasure flashed in his eyes. And suddenly his eyes turned red. He raised his hand and choked my neck. And there was a bloodthirsty fury hidden in his eyes. You really don't want to say it? The veins on his forehead bulged. And he almost gritted his teeth as he said these words. No. There's no such thing. I shook my head. Trembling, I raised my hand and gently stroked the stray hair on his forehead with my fingertips. Looking at him with pity. He was stunned for a moment. And then slowly released the hand that was on my neck. His eyes gradually became clear. Coming back to his senses, he pounced over and nervously checked my neck. Yee. Did I hurt you? His voice trembled. And his expression was filled with extreme self-blame. Just as he was about to raise his hand to hit himself, I quickly pounced on him and hugged him. The person in front of me, who I had disliked, cursed, and tortured in various ways every day in the past. But for me, he held a machine gun at the wedding and massacred the person who had killed me. He was so startled by my action that his whole body trembled. After all, in the previous life, I spurned his abnormal possessiveness and scolded him for being crazy and in need of treatment. In the previous life, when I woke up and saw him with his upper body bare, without even asking what was going on, I slapped him. I cursed him for defiling my innocence, called him disgusting, and told him to go die. In order to keep me by his side, he actually cut his own wrist, and with red eyes, he said, Yee. You can't leave me. If you leave, I won't be able to live. At that time, I just felt that his sick laugh suffocated me. And I roared at him, you'd better be serious this time. Don't just disgust me. Also, sigh. If you want to die, go far away. Don't be half dead and drag me down instead. I woke up from the memory, rushed over and grabbed his hand, and pulled up his sleeve. Seeing the smooth and unscarred skin, the guilt that had been weighing on me finally subsided. But I accidentally wet my eyes again. Mayan. I'm sorry. Mayan? His lips trembled. And he looked at me in disbelief. Mayan and I don't have any blood relationship. When I was a child, my grandfather adopted him. He became my nominal uncle. He has a kind of innate noble arrogance. So he often has a cold and stern face, making people not dare to approach him easily. Between him and me, we just met briefly during family gatherings. But until the day I fell in love with Ting, all his disguises fell apart on that day. In a deserted corner, he cornered me, and his lips came down in a vengeful manner. His rough movements seemed to want to crush me into his body. It was also on that day that he took my first kiss, making me hate him. But later, my parents and grandfather passed away one after another. My aunt and I had to depend on each other for survival. Because of this, he became even more unrestrained in showing his extreme possessiveness towards me. Especially, having fulfilled my obsession. In order to prevent me from seeing Ting, he actually turned this house into a prison. My room was filled with cameras, and there were people specially assigned to monitor me day and night. Even the bed was hung with bracelets and ankle bracelets everywhere. He was so afraid that if he blinked carelessly, I would run away. And he would never be able to find me again. And he wouldn't be able to live either. I leaned against his chest and kneaded his hand. "Mayan. Trust me. I will always be with you. Forever." Seeing that he didn't respond, I raised my head again. And my kiss, as light as a dragonfly skimming the water, went all the way up along his chin. Finally, having fulfilled my sigh, I turned around, straddled his lap, reached out and hugged him, and my lips landed beside his ear. "Mayan. Trust me." Mayan was called away by a phone call halfway. I held my blushing face and sat on the bed, giggling stupidly. In this new life, I must make up for all the regrets of the previous life. I also want to make that little crazy guy Mayan become normal under the nourishment of love. Actions speak louder than words. After simply washing and grooming, looking at my delicate skin in the mirror, which was as tender as a newly hatched egg, I smiled with satisfaction. He likes me best when I look plain and simple. After all, in the initial stage of treating his illness, we still have to slowly change according to the patient's wishes. When he came back, I was rolling up my long black hair and carefully preparing tonight's dinner for him in the kitchen. Back, I was holding a freshly cooked hot soup in my hand and took small steps to present it in front of him. My fingertips were extremely hot. Seeing him sitting there, I showed a mischievous smile. And then quickly put my red and hot fingertips on the tip of his ear and kneaded it. "Your ear is quite useful." Since there was no place for my feet to stand, I had to put one leg on his chair. Unexpectedly, having fulfilled my obsession, he pulled me, and I was directly pulled into his arms. But it was exactly what I wanted. I used my fingertips to tease his eyelashes and smiled sweetly. "Mayan. Did you miss me?" His cold eyes scrutinized me in confusion for a long time. Finally, having fulfilled my sigh, he smiled slightly, hooked his lips, and nodded in admission. "Yes." He domineeringly reached out and pressed my head, aiming at his lips. My breathing gradually became rapid, and his body temperature was also rising rapidly. He quietly took off his coat. He stood up and led me to the guest room on the first floor. During this process, his lips never left mine. It was not until I was pinned down by him that I realized something was wrong. "No. We can't." I grabbed the hand he was about to put inside, blushing with shame. "My period hasn't ended yet." "Really?" He twitched his lips, obviously not believing me. He roughly clamped my hands, pulled my clothes down, and his wet kiss with heat made me tremble with a numb feeling. "Mayan. We can't do this," I cried out hoarsely. In the end, I had no choice but to scratch his skin desperately. Only then did he stop. Looking at me, he hooked his lips in a self-deprecating manner. Yee. Why don't you go all the way if you're going to act?" After saying this, he left with a swagger. I really didn't have the strength to chase after him. After I calmed down a bit, I pulled up my clothes, aggrieved lie. "I'll settle this score with my aunt slowly later. Now, I still have to please this master." I sighed and carried the reheated porridge into his room. Since I didn't knock on the door, Mayan was caught off guard. I saw the wound on his back that extended from his shoulder all the way to his waist. And it was so deep that the skin was turning outwards. Bang! The bowl hit the ground. Looking at the newly added scratches on the wound and thinking about the pain on his body, I felt that my fingertips were going weak. I choked up and walked over, grabbed his hand, and begged him with tearful eyes. "Mayan. Come to the hospital with me. Okay? I'm scared." "Okay." He calmly stroked my hair, as if that long wound was such an insignificant thing. Even when I was sitting in the car, my body still couldn't stop trembling. I finally understood how afraid Mayan was of losing me. Because at this moment, I was equally afraid of losing him. "Who could have hurt you like this?" I couldn't stop the tears from flowing down. "Who else could it be?" "Of course it's you, young lady." Uncle Yang, the driver, suddenly interjected. "Me? You?" He was about to speak when he was glared back by Mayan. I tried hard to recall. Could it be that the day before yesterday, I climbed upstairs and tried to escape along the steel pipe? My aunt chased after me. And when I was about to land, he became my human cushion and got scratched. But such a big wound. I actually didn't notice it? I'm sorry. I lowered my head, feeling even more guilty towards him. He sneered and said infuriately, "You've done a lot of things to be sorry for me, Mayan." I wanted to explain to him. But unfortunately, all those things that made me feel guilty had already happened. In the end, I could only swallow all the words I wanted to explain. He turned his head and glanced at me. Seeing that I had nothing to say, he turned his head away and closed his eyes in silence. Yeah. The Christmas surprise that I messed up like a madman. The birthday gift that I disliked and sold at a low price. The sky-high priced ring that I threw into the trash can. The kindness that I wronged and blamed him for. I was trampling on his sincerity everywhere. But no matter how unreasonable I was, he probably would have found an excuse for me in his heart, and then soothed his mood and came to coax me. Mayan. He never once thought of giving up on me. Mayan. I leaned over to please him and wrapped my arm around his. I won't be willful anymore in the future. I will always be by your side. Let's get married. Have a few beautiful children. And then watch each other grow old slowly. Okay? Mayan didn't answer me. He cast his gaze out of the car window, looking far, far away. Following his gaze, there was just a barren mountain outside. What was there to see? But I didn't disturb him anymore. I leaned on his shoulder and enjoyed the unique warmth. Here we are. Uncle Yang opened the car door. Mayan got out of the car and reached out to help me. But before I could be happy, I was startled by a shrill male voice. Yi yi. Ting stood not far away and waved at me excitedly. Before I could react, he rushed over and bumped into me. Yi yi, yay. I miss you so much. He hugged me tightly in his arms and kept rubbing against my shoulder. I heard that you ran away from home for me and fell downstairs. It really worried me to death. He examined me up and down, and finally looked at me worriedly. Yi yi. Are you okay? He was always good at using these sweet means to win my heart. But unfortunately, I'm not the same person as before. I shook off his hand and shouted at him, "It has nothing to do with you." I was anxious to find Mayan. When I looked up, I found that he had already reached the entrance of the hospital. When I saw him going up the stairs, his feet seemed to weigh 1,000 cat ties when he lifted them. I ran up and grabbed him. Mayan. Wait for me. He turned around, and then I realized that his eyes were already red. Looking at me, he sneered and said, "Is this the reason why you went to so much trouble to pave the way and wanted to come to the hospital with me?" No. My words were drowned out by the wind. I was pulled into Ting's arms. He wrapped one arm around my waist and protectively shielded my head with the other hand, looking extremely attentive. But after all, I'm the one who was arranged by him to have a car accident and was thrown into the sea. How could I not know his true hypocritical face beneath this gentle mask? But no matter how much I pushed, Ting still wouldn't let go. Yi. You can't go back with this lunatic. He'll ruin you. Upon hearing this, Mayan turned his head and looked at me with a solemn expression. Those eyes as cold as a deep pool stared straight at me, as if trying to penetrate my innermost thoughts at the moment. A lunatic? He sneered and asked me. Yi, am I one? Let go. I resolutely pushed Ting away and rushed to Mian's side. I looked up at him flatteringly and said, "No." His hand trembled as it stroked my hair, moving from my earlobe down and tilting up my chin. Without a word, his lips landed on mine, and his eyes provocatively stared at Ting all the while. Finally, having fulfilled my obsession, his tongue slowly left my mouth. He curled his lips and licked them with great enjoyment. Pointing at Ting, he warned, "If you dare to come near Yi again, I'll kill you." I knew he wasn't lying because in the previous life, he actually did that. He kidnapped Ting to a ruin and put a knife to his neck. But I showed up in time. And with a fire, I almost burned Mayan to death. Apart from me, Mian's weakness is his fear of fire. I guiltily met Mian's scarlet eyes. He retracted his gaze and looked at me coldly. A chill knitted between his brows, as if it would pierce into my bones. Yi. Let's go home. But your injury. I still hesitated. But Mayan dragged me towards the car. Just as we were about to get in the car, Ting's voice sounded sinister from behind. Yi. Don't forget to help me complete the materials. Besides, I've already drawn your photos by hand. Upon hearing this, Mayan turned around and rushed to Ting in one stride. He grabbed Ting's collar and lifted him into the air. His eyes suddenly turned scarlet, and his pitch-black eyes stared straight at Ting. Gritting his teeth, he asked, "What photos?" An alarm immediately went off in my mind. Never tell Mayan. Otherwise, he'll kill Ting. I rushed to Mayan in fear and tightly grabbed his arm, explaining, "They're just selfies." Mayan didn't look at me. He still held Ting tightly and asked in a deep voice, "Is that so?" I frowned and gave Ting a cold warning look, hoping he wouldn't seek death. Ting's face turned red from holding his breath. Finally, having fulfilled my sizing up Mayan, he could only nod trembling lie. Only then did Mayan push Ting away in disgust. His back was tense as he looked down at Ting, who was thrown to the ground, and warned, "If you dare to have any ideas about Yi, I'll definitely make you die a miserable death." Ting crawled on the ground like a dog, gasping for breath, and stared at Mayan warily. Seeing him like this, Mayan came to my side. He lifted my chin and forced me to look directly at Ting. His tone was sarcastic and triumphant. Yi. Look. He's like a dog and doesn't deserve you at all." He carefully observed my subtle expressions. But I happened to see Ting, when his back was turned to Mayan, curl a smug smile at me. He didn't plan to let me go. My heart trembled, and my face turned deathly pale. But Mayan thought I was feeling sorry for Ting. His originally swaggering and triumphant smile immediately turned gloomy, as if he had just come out of hell. "Mayan." I was nervous and wanted to explain. But he interrupted me with a bitter smile. "Feeling sorry for him?" "No." I denied it quickly. He pulled me over and hugged me tightly in his arms. His voice was as persistent as a dream in my ear. Yi. It doesn't matter. Even if you only have him in your heart, I won't let you leave me. Never. All the way." Mayan held my hand tightly with our fingers interlocked, and his eyes seemed to be glued to me. But I turned my head and hid aside, not daring to face him. Because Ting's words reminded me of how incredibly stupid things I had done to be with him. In order to win Ting's love, I even sent him my nude photos to please him. Besides, the thing I regret the most is that I was possessed by some devil at that time and actually stole the financial data of Mayan's company and gave it to him. According to what he said, I only gave him half of it. As for the other half, I will definitely not give it to him now. He can't be allowed to keep the half he has either. A despicable person like him is very likely to gain a competitive advantage through financial means, and maliciously create price fluctuations. By then, Mayan's company is very likely to face financial pressure and operational difficulties. I absolutely can't let Mayan get hurt because of me again. I tightly held Mayan's hand and had a sudden whim to call him Mayan. He looked up. I found that whenever I call him Mayan, he will be very happy. When he's happy, his eyes will light up, like they are filled with stars. Seeing him like this, I felt even more guilty. I dodged his gaze and looked down, pretending to be calm as I tittied his collar and admonished, "You should eat a light diet now. I'll cook you egg porridge when we get home." As soon as I finished speaking, he suddenly held the hand that was tittying his collar. A chill came from his fingertips, and I couldn't help but shiver. I looked up at him guiltily and asked, "Mayan, what's wrong?" His gaze towards me was as calm as water, revealing no signs of joy or anger. After a long while, he shook off my hand and leaned casually against the chair. His gaze turned towards the window, and his voice drifted in the wind. He said, "I'm happy. Happy that my Yi will cook me egg porridge." Looking at his tall but lonely profile, the guilt in my heart was about to overflow. But I could only apologize to him in my heart. "Mayan, I'm sorry. I'm going to deceive you again this time." I sat by the bedside, looking at Mayan, who had just finished the egg porridge and fallen asleep. I couldn't help but reach out and touch his face. Mayan. Just wait for me a little longer. Just a little while. After going out, I sent a message to Ting. I just got away from Mayan. I'm on my way to your place. Ting, okay. I'll be waiting for you at home after taking a shower. Mayan ruined it last time. You have to compensate me this time. I rolled my eyes and tried my best to suppress my nausea. I took a taxi and, following the familiar road in my memory, groped my way to the community where Ting lived. But just as I reached the door and was about to knock, the door opened from the inside. A beautiful figure in white came out. Sister Yi. You're here. Mian smiled sweetly at me. Yeah. I nodded. But my gaze was fixed on her neck that she deliberately covered up. I tore it apart. And what was hidden by the scarf was the proof of their recent passionate intimacy. I stared at her and snorted coldly. Just a sister? In the previous life, A deceived me like this. Just a sister. It wasn't until I died that I saw the true faces of these two adulterers. It's really just that. Sister Yi. Don't misunderstand. I didn't expect that Nyan was still acting. She looked like she was in great distress with tears streaming down her face. What a good actress. Ting saw that I hadn't gone in and came out to look for me. Seeing the scarf in my hand and the hickey on Neon's neck, he immediately came to my side to please me. But before he could speak, I slapped him across the face, leaving him stunned. He stared at me angrily, and I glared back at him with equal anger. At this moment, the memories of being deceived by them and framed to death in the previous life overwhelmed my reason again. I clenched my fists, wishing I could slap these two scumbags to death on the spot. Ting looked at me in shock. Suppressing the anger in his heart, he hypocritically explained. Yi. Nian was bullied by someone. And she came to me to pour out her grievances. Is that so? I curled my lips. Came to you to pour out her grievances? Can you make that bastard infertile or die a sudden death on the street? I snorted coldly and looked at his groin with a mocking gaze. He turned pale under my stare. I raised my eyebrows slightly, then turned around and approached Nyan, questioning her. Don't you know he's someone else's boyfriend? I suddenly thought of something and laughed out loud. The child of a mistress is indeed like the mistress. Looking so cheap. To provoke her, I deliberately leaned close to her ear and sneered softly. Man, as long as I'm in this position, you'll always be just a mistress. Mian has a strong sense of pride and naturally couldn't stand such an insult. She turned and ran away. But it wasn't me who made her change from the legitimate girlfriend to a lover in the gutter. All of this is just a play they acted out, and suffered the consequences of themselves. As soon as Nyan left, Ting immediately grabbed my hand and explained. Yi. I really have nothing to do with her. I had no intention of listening to his explanation. I looked around, searching for the other half of the financial data, but instead of finding the materials, I saw the camera behind the curtain. It seems that everything was arranged by them. Yi. Before I could react, I was suddenly embraced by Ting. I've only seen the photos. I haven't seen the real thing yet. He lowered his head, his eyes naked with an aggressive look as he stared at my chest and reached out to unbutton my coat. I tightly held his hand and forced a smile. What's the hurry? Yi. Ting exam and me dissatisfied lie. Do you not like me anymore? I forced a couple of laughs. How could that be? Then prove it to me. With that, Ting angrily pushed me onto the bed. He leaned over me, quickly pulled up the quilt, and his hand groped tentatively. Wait. I hurriedly stopped him. Ting frowned in dissatisfaction, afraid of arousing his suspicion. I quickly cupped his face and acted cautiously. Didn't you ask me to give you the other half of the materials last time? I want to see the half you have in your hand. Mayan has been quite wary of me recently. I'm afraid I might take the wrong one. Ting twitched the corners of his mouth and sneered. Mayan. It's always Mayan again. Yi. I always feel that you have a different feeling towards Mayan now. I forced a couple of laughs. To keep him from getting suspicious, I took the initiative to wrap my arms around his neck and explained. I'm just trying to make him lower his guard so that I can come to you. How could I like him? It would be so disgusting if I did. He's my uncle. He's paranoid and perverted. I would have left him long ago if I could. Seeing that Ting was unmoved, I took the initiative to kiss his cheek. But it was this action that made me see Mayan standing at the foot of the bed with a bloodless face. Mayan. Why are you here? It wasn't until I saw Nyan standing at the door with a smug smile that I understood. It turned out that Nai and deliberately let Mayan in to see this scene. She was indeed provoked by me and stopped the opportunity for me and Ting to consummate our relationship in time. I just didn't expect that she would bring Mayan here. I immediately pushed Ting away in a panic, adjusted my clothes, and got out of bed to find Mayan. As soon as my hand touched Mayan, his tears fell one after another. Crystal clear. There was a deep sense of helplessness and confusion in his eyes, as if he was so fragile that he was about to break. Mayan. I reached out to hold his hand, only to find that his hand was as cold as ice. He came back to his senses when he heard me call him, and in a panic, he pulled me into his arms. Yi. In order not to arouse Ting's suspicion, I could only quickly take Mayan away. When we got home, as soon as the door was closed, I looked up and met Mayan's eyes. His scarlet eyes, filled with the desire of a wild beast, were sharp and obsessive, as if he was going to devour me. A cold and damp kiss landed unexpectedly, with a rough plunder. While kissing me, he led me into the bathroom. The cold water fell from the top of my head, and I shivered. He released me, and a look of struggle began to appear on his cold face. His affectionate eyes were filled with dark swirls, and something was sliding down from the corners of his eyes. It was hard to tell whether it was water or tears. He hugged me tightly, trembling, as if we were going to merge into one. He leaned on my shoulder and pleaded in a hoarse voice, Yi, will you love me? Okay. I reached out and hugged him back. Mayan released me, and his eyes were as bright and delicate as crystals and diamonds. His dark eyes looking at me were filled with a strong desire for possession. He pleaded in a hoarse voice with a sob, almost neurologically, Yi, I will definitely be better than Ting. I can also make you feel comfortable. You can give it a try. Yi. If you really like Ting that much. I don't care. But can you not abandon me? Me? Mayan. Are you being too generous? You little fool? I looked at him with pity, and a bitter smile curved my lips. I asked him, did you know that there was something wrong with the egg porridge from the beginning? So you didn't eat it? Mayan didn't dare to look at me and stammered an explanation. I was afraid that something would happen to you. So, that's why I didn't eat it. After saying that, as if afraid that I would shake off his hand, he held it even tighter. He said, Yi, I didn't mean to go in and disturb you. Mian said that Ting had arranged a camera. And he's not a good person. Mayan hung his head, looking just like a child who had done something wrong. My heart ached with bitterness. Mayan loved me so humbly. I wrapped my arms around his neck and looked at him firmly. Mayan. Nothing happened between me and Ting. I just couldn't tell Mayan for the time being that Ting had my nude photos in his hands. Otherwise, given how much Mayan cared about me, he would definitely kill Ting. I only like you, only love you, and only want to have children with you. Please believe me. Mayan looked at me with a confused look that I couldn't understand. He hesitated for a few seconds before nodding. Okay. When I woke up groggily from the bed, Mayan was about to chain me to the bed with an iron chain. When he saw me open my eyes, he immediately stopped and hurriedly explained, Yi. I'm just so afraid of you leaving me. So Mayan. You can't do this. I shouted at him anxiously. If you want to keep your lover by your side, you should do it with your heart, not by kidnapping. Remembering the embarrassment of being tied to the bed in the previous life and having to eat, drink, and relieve myself on the bed, I immediately jumped out of the bed in horror. His eyes were filled with a determined possessiveness. Holding the iron chain, he walked towards me step by step. Yi. I can't let you leave me. Mayan. No. I shook my head in fear. His eyes were so menacing that they made me tremble. Yi. Be obedient. Just be obedient. I had nowhere to retreat. So I opened the door and rushed out barefoot. I ran to the roadside and randomly stopped a car and jumped in. Hurry up. Let's go. Yee. I told you earlier that you shouldn't stay with this crazy person. Hearing that overly familiar voice, my heart skipped a beat in panic. Ting. Why are you here? Ting looked at me proudly through the rearview mirror. If I hadn't driven away the guards of the Mayan family in advance, do you think you would have a chance to run out now? How did you know that I would have a fight with Mayan? Or rather, was he the one who had been meddling in this from the very beginning? Sure enough, Ting didn't say a word, but he looked confident. I just didn't know what his plan was this time. Yee. I prepared the chocolate milk you like to drink. You can have a sip if you're thirsty. I looked at the 2 bottles of chocolate milk placed beside me, which had already been opened in advance. There was a high chance that he had put something in them earlier, so of course I wouldn't drink it. Seeing this, Ting wasn't angry. Instead, he smiled and said, "Since that's the case, you have to cooperate with me later." Cooperate with you? I was puzzled. What do you want me to cooperate with you for? Ting smiled lasciviously. Of course. To cooperate with me. To do what you most want to do with me. Remembering the camera in his house last time, I was a bit scared and immediately shared my location with Mayan. I looked up and met Ting's determined gaze in the rearview mirror. He sneered, and I was so scared that I broke out in cold sweat. Ting took me back to his house, and the door was opened by Nyan from the inside. When she saw me, there was obvious displeasure in her eyes and brows. She turned around and copiously said to Ting, Ying. We agreed that you would just shoot a video with her. You mustn't really like her. Hearing this, I imitated her delicate voice and asked Ting with tearful eyes, "Is what she said true? You don't like me? Woo. I might as well just die." After saying that, I pretended to be hopeless and was about to rush to the balcony. Only then did Ting step past Nyan and hug me in his arms. He soothed me in a tender voice. How could that be? I like Yi the most. I looked at Mian and proudly raised the corners of my mouth. Of course. Ting wouldn't let me die. After all, if I died, he wouldn't be able to use the video to blackmail Mian and get what he wanted. Once I died, Mian wouldn't let them live either. Ting understood this truth. But Nian, who was driven crazy by jealousy and love, wouldn't understand this. After all, men are creatures controlled by their lower bodies. What if Ting was controlled by me? Then all of this would be her own doing. Her hands were tightly clenched, and her eyes were so fierce that she seemed to want to rush over and tear us into pieces. Since that was the case, I would add fuel to the fire. I wrapped my arms around Ting's neck, blinked my eyes, and barely squeezed out some tears. Pointing at Nyan, I said in disbelief, "Didn't you say that you hated people like her mother the most? Didn't you say that such people are not only dirty but also shameless?" But what did she mean just now? Does she also want to take the place of the original partner as a mistress? I caught a glimpse of Neon's twisted and embarrassed face and smiled with satisfaction. Ting was in a dilemma. He didn't dare to deny it or admit it, so he had to change the subject. Yi, I miss you. Let's not waste time because of her. Okay? I pushed him away, crossed my arms and pretended to be angry, and shouted, "My mood has been ruined by this mistress who wants to take the place of the original partner. How can I be in the mood now?" Ting came over and asked me softly, "My dear Yi, what exactly do you want me to do? Drive this woman away, and never allow her to have any contact with you again." Ting looked at Nyan with the embarrassed expression. But Mian was also standing there awkwardly, waiting for his decision. Ting kept his head down and didn't dare to look at Nyan. He said softly, "You leave by yourself. Is that all?" I immediately added fuel to the fire. "A mistress is just a mistress. He even thinks it's dirty to drive you away in person. Your face is really thicker than the city walls. And you won't leave even when being driven away." Nyan snorted coldly, pointed at us and warned, "Fine. Very good. You'd better not regret it." Mian left, and Ting's naked eyes filled with desire shifted to me. Yee. Didn't you really want to do that kind of thing with me? Today, I'll grant your wish. Probably because I had driven Nyan away. Ting was naturally unhappy. But he couldn't show it. So he could only take revenge on me roughly. His big hands tore at my clothes recklessly. And soon my outer clothes were roughly torn off by him. His eyes stared at my exposed skin and gradually became burning hot. He pressed down on me forcefully. No. I tried my best to break free. But unfortunately, the gap in strength between men and women was too great. I bit him, grabbed him, and scratched him frantically. Only then did he stop his attack, lifted my chin, and sneered, Yee. The more you struggle, the more excited I get. Just as I was about to lose the last layer of clothing covering me, thick black smoke suddenly poured in from the gap in the door. Cough. Ting then coughed and got up. I quickly wrapped my outer clothes around me and opened the door of the room only to find that there was a raging fire outside. Then came Mian's urgent call. Yee. Where are you? I'm here. As soon as I tried to step out of the door, the flames had already reached my feet. I could only be forced to retreat back into the room. Behind me came Mian's mocking voice. Mian is so afraid of fire. It seems that you and I are definitely going to die today. Since that's the case, why not have a good time before we die? He reached out to tear off my clothes. I stepped back in fear again and again. But there were walls on both sides. And he was almost pushing me into the corner. I was so scared that tears streamed down my face. And I desperately hoped that Mian could rush in and kill this beast. But I also knew that Mian was most afraid of fire. As soon as he encountered fire, he would be too scared to move. It seemed that I couldn't escape today. Just when I was completely disheartened and Ting had cornered me, ready to molest me, Mian actually rushed and wrapped in a wet quilt. Mian, save me. Ting was just about to turn around when Mian picked up a chair and hit him on the head. He crawled on the ground in great pain. Seeing that the fire was getting bigger and bigger, I pulled Mian, who was ready to take crazy revenge, put the quilt back on, and was about to rush out. Yee. Save me. Ting suddenly grabbed my foot. Mian turned around. He looked at me. And his hand that was about to put on the wet quilt paused, as if waiting for my answer. Looking at him who suddenly stopped, a surge of anger welled up in my heart. Did he mean that if I said to save Ting, he would give up his chance to get out alive? I looked at him and scolded angrily. You fool! What are you thinking? Put on the quilt and let's go. Whether he lives or not depends on his fate. I didn't save him. Firstly, hadn't fulfilled way and sorry. I didn't have the ability to do so. Even if he died, at most I would be morally condemned. Besides, in my previous life, I was murdered by them. I'm not that much of a saint to extend a helping hand beyond my ability to my mortal enemy. Mian protected me, and we rushed out safely. When we came out, the firefighters also arrived. Mian was worried that I might have some internal injuries. So he insisted that I go to the hospital for a checkup. After experiencing a near-death situation, I had no strength left in my body at all. I lay on the hospital bed, watching the dim yellow setting sun slowly creeping into the French window, and unknowingly fell asleep. When I woke up again, I found that the empty ward was deserted. Mian. My commotion was so loud that Uncle Yang, the driver, panicked and ran over to ask me what was wrong. Where's Mian? Upon hearing this, his face immediately darkened. Finally, he said reluctantly, he was taken away by the police. He admitted that he set the fire. I grabbed his hand and asked anxiously, is that the truth? Tell me if that's really the case. He kept his mouth shut all the time, allowing me to question, push, and pound him over and over again. In the afternoon, I finally saw Mian at the police station. Mian, did you do it? Yes. I sneered and looked at him disappointedly, asking, then did you want to burn me to death? No. He immediately shook his head and denied it. I slapped the table and shouted at him. Then, why are you lying? He didn't say anything more, and our conversation came to a halt. I never waited for his explanation. Ting was dead. If Mian pleaded guilty, It would be the crime of intentional homicide. He couldn't not know the consequences of this. I really couldn't figure out why he did it. Fortunately, he was released by the police less than half a day after he was taken in. They said the fire started from the inside. When Mayan arrived, the fire had already broken out. They checked Mian's itinerary for that day, and it was simply impossible for him to have the time to set the fire. However, I was identified as a suspect. Only then did I realize who that silly Mian was trying to shield. It was actually me. However, besides me, Mian was also identified as a suspect, because after she was driven out by me, she turned back and didn't come out from inside afterwards. So where on earth did she go? The police compared the DNA, and Neon's DNA was not found in the ashes. But Ting lived on the 28th floor. Even if she jumped down, she would probably be dead. Yet she seemed to have disappeared into thin air without a trace. Just when the police were at their wits and looking for her, she came to me first. In the middle of the night, she stood at the foot of my bed, holding a knife and smiling sinisterly at me. Yi, I'm here to claim your life. She didn't know that Mayan was like a clingy plaster, insisting on sleeping next to me. As early as when she was talking a lot and bluffing, Mayan, who was buried under the quilt, had already woken up. Before she could take action, Mayan wrapped her up with the quilt one step ahead. He smiled, and his enchanting eyes curved slightly. The way he looked at me seemed to penetrate me. Mayan and I went to the police station to give statements. When we came back, Mayan oddled in the car. Like a child, he acted cocaciously in my arms and said, Yi, let's give it a try tonight. I'm definitely stronger than Ting and can make you feel more comfortable. I was too sleepy to open my eyes and said irritably, my period hasn't ended yet. Leave me alone. He pouted and mumbled. Then when will your period end? I said, I don't know. From then on, every night he would get out from under the quilt and ask me, Yeah, has your period ended? Finally, having to filled my I'm sorry. After keeping an eye on the trash can in the toilet for 2 days and not finding any sanitary pads, he never asked me again. He directly dragged me under him and couldn't wait to unbutton his clothes. Yi, you'll know once you try. I can make you feel more comfortable than Ting. I've already said that I've never tried it with Ting.